Welcome, everyone, to our Barriers for Breakfast vidcast here at Setser Group. We often do this work, as you know, across YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook Live. And it's a series about innovators, but innovators who I've came across not only in my career or through my network, that I felt a kindred spirit with, that I felt a sense of possibility of what could be. And watching their work alongside of mine sort of take shape over the years. It's always great when we can bring somebody doing outstanding work, but also who's been a friend and colleague over really the span of the last 10 years for me. Today we have Sarabeth Berk with us, who not only has written the book More Than My Title, but has been an innovation lead at the university level, working on innovation work in K-12 and certainly for organizations. And what's so compelling about her as a guest is this notion of hybridity. And that's going to be a word that you're going to learn today as we move in sort of post-pandemic. It's now more important than ever that we move beyond these traditional definitions of experts and generalists, and we embrace sort of the multifaceted what is, and that's that we all bring interesting knowledge sets, skill sets, dispositional sets to our work. And I love this notion of just letting Sarabeth talk about what she's passionate about, because I think you're going to see that come through. So Sarabeth, we're going to dive right in today. And why are you interested in hybrid professionals? Why does this matter? And why should our listeners care?
Oh my gosh, Bryan. First of all, thank you. I'm so excited to talk about this with you. And I've been looking at this for years, even before hybridity became such a big deal with COVID. But yeah, the reason I am so passionate about this topic and why I started on this journey is we've got a real dilemma in society. Not only are people more than their job title, they don't know who they are as professionals. This notion of professional identity is a really messy, sticky one. And honestly, we're not talking about it. So I started on this research path because I didn't know how to describe myself. When people asked, "What do you do?" I was like, "I'm a director of programs," but that never felt quite right. I was also a teacher and an artist and a designer. I couldn't quite explain, why do I wear so many hats? And eventually what I realized is I actually work at the intersections of these multiple hats. I'm a combination of them. Whoa, okay, that's a really different way to think about me and my work and what I do. But then how do I label that? What does that mean? That's when I realized I'm a hybrid professional because of the intersectionality. When I started interviewing other professionals, I found this time and again, this problem resonated with them. They didn't know how to say, why they're a jack of all trades. And so this notion of being a hybrid professional is much bigger than just, naming something. It's really giving people permission to be multiple things. It's helping people engage and feel more fulfilled in their work because they've been compartmentalizing themselves for far too long. And it's about finding what makes you unique. Everyone wants to know what's your unique value in the workforce. Well, if you're just listing, I do this and this and this and this, nobody really knows what makes you stand out. So the hybrid identity and hybrid professionals really have a special spot in the workforce. And that's the message I'm trying to get out: awareness, permission, and then how to do this, how to figure it out for yourself so you know who you are. And that's the power. That's why I care about this.
There's so much to dig into there, and I want to take you back to sort of our story together. Over the years, we've had several dinners and coffees where we lamented the very thing you're talking about, where was this enough? Was being in this role as a C-suite member or a chief or a director, was it enough? And were we getting fulfilled from that? And I remember, and our listeners might not know this, but there's always people on the way to your journey that kind of agitate you a little bit in a good way or call you out a little bit in a good way. And I remember we were sitting talking in Denver and you said, "Bryan, why don't you just do that? Why are you looking to find that in an organization or possibly, lead an organization that's incumbent? Why don't you just create your own?" And I didn't have a good answer for that night, because I think what a lot of our listeners would say is they're walking this tension between stepping out or jumping and also the safety net of what they think traditional professional roles are and what they should just deal with. But I know you're really passionate in terms of what this looks like for how you start to do it within an organization and how you start to even think about forming your own work or your own niche. So I'd love for you to give us a vulnerable sense of if somebody's listening to this and they're inside of an organization, inside of a team, and they're starting to think about that tension that you and I've wrestled with, what should they do? How should they promote themselves? How should they carve out their story for the next stages of what they're meant to be?
Oh, yeah, there are so many layers we could unpack together on this topic. So, first, let me give a definition of hybrid professional identity. It is a worker who has multiple identities and works at the intersection of them. It's this integration that makes them a hybrid as opposed to just multiplicity, which is many, right? There's separation when you're just many things. So workers who are noticing, wow, I really love being a designer, but I also love education and curriculum, but I'm also interested in strategy and have this leadership side. If you are noticing those aspects of you are all important and you can't choose just one, then you're already feeling that tension inside of yourself of like, how do I show people who I am? So I think the first step is always self-awareness and recognition that you even have this like discomfort about who you are and how people see you. Identity work is about being seen. And if you don't see yourself, then other people won't see you the way you want to be seen. So step one is self-awareness. Step two, I call this the emerging hybrid stage. Sometimes you're in your hybridity and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you are just wearing that one hat of, okay, I'm being the leader in this moment, or okay, now I'm being the curriculum developer. And that's okay. But if your hybridity in my definition is when you're really the sum of your parts and everything is like flowing together, you feel you're most energized because you don't have to turn on or turn off different identities. You can use them simultaneously. So the goal in my mind is to be in your hybridity as much as possible because it feels good and you perform better. So if you're in that emerging stage, it's getting more attuned to what you're doing, what kind of work you're doing when you're in your hybrid moments. Are you running meetings and having people role play and bringing in interesting visual aids? And that's a combination of all of your talents, and you love that part of your work. Notice that, pay attention to that. I tell people that's when you're in that zone of genius, those flow states. Because when you can realize those are your hybrid spaces, you can do them more often, and then you're going to love your work more. And then the third part really is about communication and articulation. You need to be able to talk about your professional identity, and identity is different than what you do. So identity is the noun, right? Who I am, where what you do are the actions and your skills. And I see people get this confused a lot, like, oh, I love writing newsletters and I love meeting with leaders and I love connecting. So many people love connecting. But who are you in those moments? How do you show up? What do you call yourself? So you've got to get clear on how you think of your professional identity and then start introducing yourself that way, talking to your manager and your employees and your staff about how you see yourself. Just an example from my own story. My title was a director of programs, and I would come into meetings and everyone would go around the room saying their name and their title. But I would also say, I'm Sarabeth, I'm this director of programs, but I'm actually a hybrid professional because I'm working, between art and design and teaching. And that's how I'm doing this work. That extra layer of just talking about being a hybrid or talking about my intersections changed the way people saw what I did. They understood who I was so much better. And then that helped with conversations with my manager because they were, understanding my performance and what turned me on. So there was a lot of positive outcomes when I could communicate who I was, how that trickled into all the work I did. So those are some of my steps.
No, that's very helpful. And just for our listening audience, we're here with Chief Creative Disruptor and friend Sarabeth Berk on our Berries for Breakfast podcast. And we've covered some issues around why hybridity matters in not only the world we're in, but the world we're headed towards. And we've also talked about some examples of being seen and showing our identities and making sure that people understand we're much more than our title. So I want to linger there in terms of, how we activate this and how we make sure that, leaders out there that are listening and thinking about their teams and their people really get a sense of this. You've known me for a long time, and I don't ever put the doctor in front of my name, but it's interesting how people see that or find that out once they learn about it in terms of higher ed, and they'll treat me differently if I put that on a title or put that on a piece of paper. When I'm often in education circles and people try to peg me as the business guy or to think about, what it means to go into edubusiness, they often don't know that I was a teacher or an assistant principal or a principal and that have sat in the seat of those roles. And then when I'm working at the intersection of business, people say, well, aren't you the educator or aren't you the trainer? And my constant response is, I hope so. I hope I'm all of those things to you, because that's going to bring a different skill set, a different lens into the work we do. So I think people have a hard time articulating their titles, a hard time articulating their value from that title. So I really want to go deeper on this notion that as you started to have those conversations with your peers, they saw you in different ways. So how does the listener think about a resume, a LinkedIn presence, a personal brand? How do they begin to actually act more than their title?
Oh, Bryan, you're hitting all my favorite topics. We could really talk for days. So I wrote a book because I realized no one had shared this information with me about you can be a hybrid professional. And then I created a workbook that's separate because I have a whole process on how do you find your hybridity and how do you brand and name it. I call that your hybrid title,
Mhm.
because those are really key processes that nobody else has invented. That's why
Mhm.
I'm sort of a pioneer in this, working at the intersection of career development, identity research, and personal branding. I have all these career development professionals coming to me saying, we want your tools. We've never seen this before. So, gosh, where do we even start with this one? From, putting this into action, the beginning of this work is knowing your primary professional identities. So identity is a spectrum, right? We have many different identities: race, class, gender, age, ability, so forth. And professional identity is one sliver. So within that vein, what are the different identities you wear in your work? And then of all of those, which ones do you use the most? Which ones are showing up daily and that you love and enjoy and you want to be known for? Because most people don't even know that core bucket. And to be a hybrid, you have to have a minimum of two professional identities, because two identities makes one intersection. And I say the maximum limit is four, because it gets too complicated after that. So two, three, or four primary professional identities is your foundation. And think of this like a recipe. You have to know your core ingredients when you're making something. And so when you dial into your primary identities, then you draw a Venn diagram and start to wonder, who am I at the intersection of those? That's the idea of in a recipe when you're combining, bacon and cheese and pineapple and salami, like what are you making,
Right.
right?
Right.
And that's where this hybrid title comes in. There's actually an emergence of new keywords and language and themes that are very unique to you, because that's your secret sauce. It's your special blend. So
Mhm.
for me, in my example, my primary professional identities are being an artist, educator, researcher, and designer. That's what I want to be known for. And if someone told me I can't be those identities tomorrow, part of me would be missing. That's how critical they are.
Right.
When I combined those four identities together, I saw that I'm a challenger, and I was pushing people through interesting questions and using design thinking and making these visual graphics about data and doing strange things like that. And the key ideas that were emerging there were this challenger, creative, disruptor, pusher, things like that. And from that, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm a creative disruptor.
Mm.
That's my hybrid title. That's
Right.
actually the truest way for me to talk about who I am And I can give very clear examples of what I do that ties back to the Creative Disruptor because it's all linked together. So my personal brand is defined by my hybrid title. Sarabeth, the Creative Disruptor, is someone who's developing innovation strategies that radically connect people and ideas in new ways. It flows together. So that's a little bit of the journey of how people need to do a lot of internal work. It's very introspective. Plus, you have to look at hard examples of what you're actually creating, what your products are, what you're doing to help you see who am I really in these moments. And then it becomes the recipe and the hybridity emerges out of that. But this is messy work. I made it sound kind of straightforward, but when I work with people, it's like they've never had this mirror held up to them before. And it has to be a lot of questioning that metacognition, like, how do I really see myself? I've never thought about myself in these ways. And it's a beautiful process, but this is a new question I'm noticing people have just never thought about. Who are you in the intersection of your identities? That's big.
You know, we're here today on the Barriers for Breakfast podcast with Sarabeth Berk. We're talking a lot about being more than our title. We just finished a section when you have an opportunity to go back and watch or rewind, where we've been talking about sort of unleashing the skill set and disposition and approach, but all inside of what you really are when you break down the intersectionality of a lot of ideas. And she used this notion of a creative disruptor. I've often used this notion of edupreneur. Like when I think about myself, there's this really deep rooted sort of edu lens across many facets. And then there's this entrepreneurial tendency, way of thinking, no matter what I'm doing, whether it's helping a startup or it's helping a school district think about what they could be along a service line or a support line or a professional development initiative. And so a lot of times on these lives, we workshop a real problem or things that are, you know, sort of on our minds these days. And what I would say, because we envision this live series to be more like we met at a conference, or as I'm often in Denver or see Sarah out on the circuit, we'll make sure to connect. But here's what I want to really hone in on for our folks. Setser Group in our first, year and a half has learned a lot about the people we're working with, and whether that contractor is a hybrid, whether they're a generalist, whether they're an expert, whether they have certain pieces that can be developed or extenuated. And what I like to think about is, because we've actually worked together, where I kind of, why would I bring Sarabeth in? Well, because on the creative disruptor side, you're going to push the thinking. You're going to help people see things in ways that they have not. You're also going to make connections creatively to the experiences you've had. And here I am trying to build a firm. And what I often find, Sarabeth, is people who really were taught task behavior or, checklist or sequences, or just tell me what to do. And I think we have a challenge in our industry of growing the capacity of hybrids, right? Like really saying, look, you've had some experiences in design thinking, you've had some experiences in data visualization, you've worked on teams. I need you to manage up. I need you to create and have the permission to create in ways that you're going to experience, succeed, fail. And guess what? All of that's okay. But what I don't need you doing is being paralyzed, second guessing yourself, etc. So the problem I'm presenting to you, Sarabeth, and my own therapy is, how do I help my people? Because I'm just like any other organization. I've got some hybrids, I've got some emerging hybrids, and I've got people that aren't. And how do we help them get there where they can keep adding to their skill sets, their learning, and how they can become creative disruptors?
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, the team dynamic of this, I think you made a really good point. There are people that are not hybrid professionals, right? I don't believe everybody is or needs to be, but if you want to be, you can grow into it or evolve into it. Because I think there's a lane for experts, a lane for generalists, and a lane for hybrids. essentially in my framework, that's singularity, multiplicity, and hybridity.
Mm.
And all three, I think, belong together on a team for high performance. You need sort of that combination. So for people on your team, first of all, it's who is which kind? Like, do
Right.
you even understand? Have you had that conversation with your staff to do a little bit of that identity work? I think we rely, maybe not you, Bryan, but in general, other teams are using personality assessments and
Right.
Myers-Briggs and DISC to figure out these profiles of their team members, which is about qualities of personality and skills, but not
Mhm.
identity.
Right.
And so you can take those frameworks and the results from assessments, but you still need to go, okay, now who are you as this profile, an
Mhm.
INFJ or whatever?
Right.
Um, and so I think one, it's helping people have internal validation versus external validation. So just because your job title is head of marketing, director of sales, product design support, whatever, who are you really? What identities are you bringing? And then for people that are somewhere in that space of trying to understand, okay, I think maybe I am a hybrid and didn't realize it. Start with a Venn diagram. What are those primary identities? What would you label in your 3 or 4 circles? Then really start to sink in. And this takes time. This isn't just a 1-hour session. What's happening at the intersection? How are you merging and marrying your identities? What does that feel like and look like? And why does that matter to you? And if people are seeing that as part of their power and their talent and what they're bringing to the table in your work, then celebrate that and share more opportunities like that with them. But if they're struggling to cross over and make those connections, then maybe that's not their hybridity. It shouldn't be something you force. It should
Right.
really just be an opportunity for growth. I see it almost as professional development. And if we're going to use this other language, it's self-actualization. For
Mhm.
people in the hybridity, it's when you start to combine parts of yourself, you're becoming a fuller picture, right? Because
Right.
it's additive. The
Mm.
different ways things blend together makes you more of you instead of compartmentalized. So
Mm.
that's a little how I would talk to your team. It's a conversation about identity and people knowing themselves as opposed to being told, hey, Bryan, you're the CEO or the edupreneur. And you go, is that me? Who am I really?
Right.
So start with that, have an identity conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there as we're talking on our Berries for Breakfast podcast with Sarabeth Berk around being more than your title, having creative disruption from a lens of Sarabeth's hybridity, but not necessarily everybody's, and how we begin to sort of map talent to task, right? So
Yes.
what I take away from your conversation is I think I started Setzer Group not necessarily thinking that I wanted a lot of like-minded people. It was more about, could I get a lot of flexible, versatile people that could be comfortable with ambiguity, that could, flex into areas where if they didn't have that speciality, they knew how to collect it or curate it. And
Yes.
what I always tell people is, my greatest hybrid strength is curiosity. I mean, I just always enter situations with, there has to be a different way, a better way, ways that we can hack. How can we think about the restraints or the constraints we have and kind of innovate through them and around them? And I can get really trapped with, well, doesn't everybody think that way? And surely everybody thinks that way. And what I often experience from my team, from client teams, is, do you understand that we need another 2 hours to unpack what you said or what you're thinking? And I don't say that from a narcissistic point of view. I still haven't learned it. Like at 50 years old, I kind of, yeah, they're operating from a different lens, or they're not quite in that space, or they're very tactical or very technical. So I love this point about assembling all of those identities on a team and thinking about how to move them around so that the overall is more effective. If you're a middle manager, if you're a school superintendent, if you're a university president, I was really compelled by this notion that we're all doing individual assessments, we're all doing team assessments and organizational assessments. but it's the identity that really allows you to connect to this person's purpose, their passion, and how do we activate them, right? So if I'm going through this process as an organization and I've got a small team that's working with you, in cases where you've been helping people, what are some things that emerge right away as challenges? And what are some things where you're like, boy, when teams get this, you can really see progress?
Oh my gosh. Bryan, can we go back just a little bit? Because you made a point a moment ago that I wanted to hold on to. And then can I come to this question? Because it's a great
Absolutely.
one. So first, just share with me, what is the title you use in Setser Group
For myself,
for yourself? Sorry.
CEO and founder.
Okay, perfect. So that's a pretty blanket general title. We know a lot of CEO founders. But as you were just describing what you do and this curiosity that you express, the word wayfinder was really coming up for me in terms of maybe that's more of who you really are, or maybe you're the curiosity wayfinder or the detector of curiosity. There's new ways of reshaping and reframing who is Bryan really in terms of your role on the team. And that gives us a different lens to understand your role, your strength, and the way you're showing up in your work. One other example, because I just want to make this concrete, I think it helps to have examples. One other example of a gentleman I worked with was a project manager. Again, very simple, generic title. We all know project managers. When we unpacked his hybridity, he had a researcher methodology background, had some writing in there, and was working with this engineering team. And he was managing across the different talent and work streams. And the hybrid title that came up for him was tension methodologist. He was really helping balance and redirect people and time and resources. Well, that is a very different way to call him than the project manager. So the power in unpacking and revealing these hybrid titles is about really acknowledging who people are, and it changes how we effectively put them into the work they're doing, or even hiring them for that matter. So I just wanted to use that because I think that's where I'm going with this work.
Before we go to challenges and progress, you know, the crystallization of Wayfinder would be Sherpa. You know, there's been this feeling throughout my career that people seek me out and I seek them out because they want to better understand or they want to find a way through. And I'm compelled by that as a value prop to say, you know, the most often description I get from peers or clients or other things is like, you know, he will help you find a way, or he will help you figure this out, right? And that's from a multitude of influences that I've curated together to say, yep, this is scary, this is thorny, but I know how you should take that on, and I know ways and people and networks that we can bring to bear to get through this, right? So I really love that notion. And also telling my team that from an internal standpoint that like, look, I'm not a micromanager. I'm not a, you know, hard guy to get along with, but I do often see the path faster than most.
Yes.
And that's been a burden since childhood, right? Where I just see it, and then getting people to bring that along or getting their capacity up or their courage up to then go on that path with me. That's always my Damocles sword of both challenge and opportunity and the way that I would go through it. So really love that. And I suspect, go ahead.
I love that you shared that. It is those little phrases that people use about you or you use about yourself that sharpen in who you really are. And so if you're the Sherpa, I mean, that's a really powerful tool of your identity. The other idea, because I've known you for years, I was getting the key word of a crystallizer. You are so good at bringing things into sharp focus of clarity. Maybe you're the crystallizing Sherpa, right? Like this is helping us actually really see more of you. I love this right now.
No, I value the feedback because I think, you know, and audience, you know, there's something when we transition to challenge, like some people will only see you as the CEO or the project manager until they can see you as the Sherpa or the crystallizing Sherpa. Or other people are used to their own stories too around what you bring to an image or a response, et cetera. And I think, 50 is such a milestone for me. But what I was telling somebody the other day is I'm definitely more, back to your self-awareness point, of how I'm perceived and how I read the room and how I can create relief or excitement or a sense of calm. And all of those things can be a part of that Sherpa hybridity. Because, if you're going up Everest, you want a sense of safety, you want a sense of, excellence, because we could die. But if you're going through a new project that has some risk or maybe visible to a university president or to a superintendent, you want some assurances that there's some evidence, but you also may have been given permission to take 3 different trails. Mm-hmm. And so, to play the metaphor of the Sherpa out even further, some of it depends on your audience or your charge, right? And how you're leading that. And I think historically, relationships like mine and yours, because we've experienced each other for multiple years, there's also, you don't have to reclaim that to an extent, meaning that there's a foundation of the relationship. So as you're working with teams, it's a good segue because we both work with them. We both walk into organizations where this is tough, and kind of bringing people along or playing that role of creative disruptor, Sherpa, and even playing it together, right? Because we've done that and we've had to figure out, okay, how are we going to mix and match and make this work? So would love to hear some of your challenges and opportunities, then I'll happy to share some more.
Oh my gosh. I this is where I want to bring in some identity research, because this is getting into some of the sticky parts of the conversation. Identities can be fixed and identities can be fluid and changing. Like the person you and I were 10 years ago is slightly different than who we are today. Some of those identities have carried forward and some have left us. I'm not the classroom teacher anymore, right? So I think there's something to where, even though you are growing and evolving, and you kind of mentioned it depends on your audience and how you're showing up, I also argue that when you really know your hybridity, it sort of becomes a stabilizing force. It's like the common thread of who you've been through all these different roles and jobs and past titles, and it's more consistent because it's the true you. So I think the Sherpa energy has probably been a part of many of your prior roles, even if it wasn't apparent or you didn't use that language. That's just my guess. And then one other tip I wanted to mention, it is just part for the course that people have to use traditional job titles. Like if you are the CEO founder, you're going to need to say that. But I think the difference here is that that is such a general way of labeling ourselves. And when you show up in a room of 1,000 other CEO founders, what separates them? How are they different? So the differentiator is the hybridity, the hybrid title, or at least recognizing the intersections of who you are. And the basic way to do that is to say your job title first, and then add your hybrid title or your intersectional space. So you're Bryan, the CEO founder, and you call yourself, or people call you, a Sherpa. Like that can help create a little more uniqueness, just as food for thought. I think you wanted me to go into my challenges next. Repeat the question.
Before I repeat it, I want to linger on connecting it to something that you said. This notion of intersectionality has come up with the past year on where we've all been with racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I first went deep in it with 228 Accelerator out of DC and learned a ton about the notion of intersectionality from that lens. But it's also come up in client engagements where we're working with HBCUs. And so what you shared about where I was 10 years ago, where I am now, I'll give you a quick story and then we can cascade it into challenges and opportunities. Of all the white supremacy language, the one that is embedded in my DNA the deepest is my bias for urgency, right? Like I'm just a doer. That's hard coded. Like, when do you think you can have that done? Tomorrow, this week? Like it's a natural default, and I've had it for a long time. And I think consulting can breed it because they're in trouble. They need help. They are super innovative, but they've got a tight timeline. They are a startup. They are a HBCU. They're an R1. There's all these problems, right? And there's all these questions they're asking. And not only are they looking for a Sherpa, but a lot of times they're looking to get there very fast. And so I have to resist this temptation to say, well, let's not fall off the mountain. Let's not, do something that we're going to step into that's not well thought out or designed. And so I think even within the intersectionality, even within the disruption part, I was brought in this past year to an HBCU to play your title, right? The Chief Disruptor. And what instantly became clear is that was important. And there was these other hybridity things that I would have to both work my way into, work my way through, and decide, could I play the multiple notes of that composition? And I think that's a skill set of, even if it's your dominant trait, urgency wasn't going to work in that particular situation for multiple reasons. However, the way in which I showed up or reinvented my hybridity or reinvented how I was intersectional, that's a skill set that I think, people, back to the lanes thing, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
And it takes experience. It takes, and I know it sounds odd talking about it as a strength, but it takes humility, right? Because you have to be able to say, the way I played that is no longer called for, and now I've got to reinvent how I enter. So I don't know that there's a great question in there. I think it's more about navigating the challenges and opportunities.
Quick reflection on that. In my research on hybrid professionals, what you're describing really fits the research that hybrids are people that are chameleons and translator and shapeshifters, because they're boundary crossers, and you are very adept to that. So maybe you're more of the adaptable Sherpa or something, because everyone moves through their hybridity differently. When I hear people say I'm a good translator, connector, problem solver, that's very true, but there's a certain type and way that you're doing it that's different than other people. So the way you just described, you flex in, you figure out the urgency, you're shape shifting. That is a unique recipe of Bryan that other hybrids would not be able to replicate. So that's why that's your uniqueness. And coming up with more color and language and description for us to specify that would be the future work I'd recommend we do if you wanted to. But anyway, what you were saying just really resonated.
Well, I think I was at a workshop Friday with the great branding firm Elephant in the Room, and I'd never heard this before, but I thought it was great. They talked about a brand is a promise. Mm-hmm. So what happens is if you buy, Tide, you expect it to clean your clothes, and it does. So therefore it becomes this promise, right? If you have an opportunity to go to Walt Disney World, they've focused on customer service being that promise, right? And you don't go there expecting less than, or the way it was different 5 years ago. And to their credit, they've really maintained that promise, right? So when we talk about further work, not only between you and me, but with clients, and sort of saying, okay, let's say more about that, because if you're the great crystallizer, you still haven't gotten down to crystallizing your brand in 2 or 3 words where people can say, yep, that's the promise. Like when I go to him or I work with him, that's what it's really about, right? Whereas I think in writing this book, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you spent a lot of time saying, nope, like I'm going to creatively disrupt where you are with this thinking or how you think about others, et cetera. And that's why you would seek me out.
Yeah, it's taken me a really long time to own who I am, to acknowledge who I am, and to give myself permission to be all of these identities I've accumulated. Because the traditional advice is you have to choose one thing, you have to niche down. If you have multiple interests, the world won't understand you. Being a jack of all trades is bad. And I believe a lot of those are myths I'm busting. There is an option. It's this whole idea of getting rid of binaries. It's not just experts and generalists anymore. You can live in a space that's a combination, that's hybridity. So, yeah, being seen as a creative disruptor, and I chose that title specifically both because it resonates, it's authentic to me. It's not just cute and jargony. I can substantiate it with here's demonstrations of past projects where I've done that. I'm the disruptor because I'm pushing, I'm sometimes breaking things, I'm silo busting, I'm doing all that. I'm asking questions that are uncomfortable. But the creative side, that's why I add creative disruptor, because I'm doing it actually from a positive place of reaching potential, bringing in good, supporting impact. I'm not doing it to destroy and negate and suppress things. And I'm artistic. So I've got to let that creative side of me come into the challenging and the new beliefs and imagination. So it is the truest way for me to express this is who I am. And literally, when I started using that language and saying it out loud, I felt differently. People responded to me differently. People hadn't heard of this before. It became intriguing. It became the way to open new relationships, and people connected with me more than they did with basic job titles. And if we're going to talk about personal branding, one of my favorite expressions I learned recently is personal blanding. That is 90% of what we are doing. When you are just using general words like I'm a coach, I'm a leadership authority, I'm an author, I'm a writer, like that doesn't mean anything. Everyone is using the same words. But using a hybrid title or even adding the right descriptors like, adaptable Sherpa, that carves out a lane for who Bryan is. And Creative Disruptor carves out a lane for me. And then there's a way, I have a whole hybrid identity elevator pitch on my website. If people want that, it shows you how to do this introduction. Whew.
I love it, and we're here to our final question with Sarabeth Berk, a creative disruptor and author of More Than My Title. She's joined us today on the Setser Group Barriers for Breakfast live cast, where we often interview innovators who are trying to literally get up every morning and look at barriers for breakfast. They believe that the world is solvable, that we can go through this in a way to navigate towards better outcomes. And Sarabeth has always been that as a friend and colleague, and somebody that, I'll seek out because I want to get re-energized. I want to get reconnected. So we had talked about hybrids attract other hybrids, that there's this notion of if you find yourself next to one or working with them, great. What do you do if you don't? And I don't think I've ever asked you that question. Like, I get the lanes comment, right? But it's not just with hybrids. We are drawn to each other through a variety of intersections. What I do with my male friends or my white male friends versus my black and brown friends. It's not a versus, it's an and, really. It's different points of learning, growing, evolving, different ways of interacting. And I think we are drawn by nature to people who think similarly, they react to similar situations. And even though hybrids can show a chameleon aspect, which you mentioned earlier, what do they need to work on when they're really dealing with people that aren't hybrids, and how they begin to, think about them and their team success? Or leave us with a couple thoughts there, because I think I leave today's conversation with the biggest takeaway being, we just did a sort of human resources interview process around how the first year has gone, and where people's strengths are, where they want to be put in their purpose or their passion. But what we haven't done is take all of that data and now say, well, here's how we Sherpa you through that, and here's how we begin to make that work. I guess to frame all that in a question is, hybrids like me certainly need to continue to learn. They certainly need to continue to work with folks like you. But how do they really think when they're encountered with somebody who is so lane focused and is a specialist, to give that grace, to give that a place to grow?
Oh, this is good, Bryan. Great final question. What's coming up for me is this notion that, first of all, I wish I could quantify how many hybrid professionals are in the workforce, because sometimes I think it's very pervasive. I know it's across all industries because I've talked to people in all disciplines, but I believe more people think they are hybrid professionals than actually are. It's the difference between being multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. The inter is that intersectional space. I think fewer people are actually good at the interdisciplinary, but that's just a hypothesis. So recently I did have an opportunity. I met someone and he told me firmly, I'm just an engineer. Like, that's all I am. And it had been a while since I had met someone who was so strong in just one identity. And so the key thing I'm sitting with is just respect. Like, now that I know that's how he sees himself and that's all he wants to be, I know actually how to work with him, because it's like, okay, I'm going to focus on that kind of work and topics and ideas with him that way. But as the hybrid, I know I need him to embrace me as this sort of boundaryless, silo buster, messy, like I'm going to be the chameleon in the work. But there is a place for everyone. So first, it's just that respect, right? If I know who I'm working with and they know clearly who they are, that changes everything. It's the people that don't know who they are that I think are harder to work with. When I meet people that list 5 and 10 things that they do and their side business and their side hustle, I'm very confused. I don't know where to start a relationship or how to build a project with that person, because they're almost too much of a jack of all trades. So the final thought I want to leave with, because this is a key idea, is that if you are a hybrid professional, you are the expert of your own hybridity. No one else is merging together the 3 or 4 identities that you are. So that is why you actually do have expertise. It's a hybrid expertise. And so the jack of all trades notion, where if you're all these things, then you're not good at any of them, I disagree. I think the hybrid can be many things, but creates a new sweet spot because they're the sum of those. It's a little interesting twist on this old adage.
Thank you to Sarabeth Berk, a creative disruptor and author of More Than My Title. She's joined us today, of course, for our Barriers for Breakfast livecast, where we talk to innovators, and you'll be able to see this on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. In July, we're going to set up a premiere date and invite Sarabeth back to, answer more questions from followers and kind of share this message out into the world. Sarabeth, I know we'll stay on for the after show, but thank you for being with us today, and hope to see you soon in Denver when we're up that way in August. So thank you so much for today.
Absolutely. And people can find all my resources at morethanmytitle.com. Lots of freebies and fun videos and such. So Bryan, it's been a pleasure.